Hello, party people, and happy ediscovery day. Welcome to Law Candor Live. For those of you that are already familiar with the show, you know that Law Candor is the podcast solely devoted to the legal technology revolution. You also know that it is my mother's favorite podcast and my grandmother's favorite podcast. I am Bill Mariano. I apologize ahead of time for my co-host, Rob Hellowell, who, because you're looking at him in live and living color, is coming to you in that translucent blue complexion. You just have to slide that brightness down on your computer a little bit. It'll be a little bit less distracting. We have a great show for you today. We have three fabulous guests. Before we get to those fabulous guests on eDiscovery Day, we're going to the favorite part of our show.
Sightings of radical brilliance.
And as the name implies, and as you know, if you're familiar with the show, this is the part of the show where we bring to you the latest around the world of noteworthy innovation and acts of sheer genius. Rob, what do we have for the folks today?
You know, Bill, it was inevitable given everything that's happened this year. But of course, to save you that trip to the COVID-infected mall, this year we have AI Santa. And you can log into asksanta.com and now interact through a wonderful AI experience with Santa. And just a couple of things, if you're going to do this. First of all, I tried this out with my kids last night, and be really careful when you type in that URL, because if you type in Ask Satan instead of AskSanta.com, it's a really bad experience, and our kids will be getting therapy this year.
Yeah, I actually logged into this too, and and I get the whole point behind it. They want people to have a safe environment at home where they could have their kids tell Santa what they want to do, what they want for Christmas. But if you thought the time-honored tradition of taking your child to sit on a stranger's lap who is clad in velvet and patent leather couldn't get any creepier, you would be wrong. Log into this thing. It is creepy as heck. You hold down a button that says, that says mic. You hit the mic. You tell them what you want for Christmas. Santa looks at you. The AI algorithm is digesting. It's a real person. He's just sitting there. It's digesting what you're asking him. And then he goes, maybe you won't get what you want this Christmas. Maybe you'll get what you need. And it's just creepy. I logged off immediately. It's not for me. I understand the thought process behind it. It's supposed to be adorable, but I thought it was anything but.
Yeah, I had much higher expectations for this. I figured that you would log in, while you logged in, it would use machine learning to look at your zip code, pull your credit report, do some demographic, look at your Amazon search history, and it would already know what you would be asking for. But no, I agree. I had a similar semi-creepy experience even after we got past the Ask Satan.
I would argue that it's probably creepier than AskSatan.com. So even if you made the mistake, it would be less creepy. But anyway, I digress. Check it out if you have kids, but look at it first on your own before you let a kid look at it, because you could traumatize them and put them in years of therapy for Christmas instead of giving them like the dump truck that they wanted.
Yeah, definitely. Super interesting stuff. Well, look, I know nobody tunes into this to just hear us speak. It's time to get to the more exciting part of our show, where we bring in our guest speakers, and we're really excited to have three of our favorite industry experts. And what I really wish we had right now, Bill, is some great...
Theme music. That's what you wished we had.
That's what I was wishing we had.
See, ask and ye shall receive. It's almost like virtual Santa was listening and gave you that gift. All right. Please, we have three great guests today. We're really excited about this. We've been talking to these guys for a little while now, prepping for it, and it's gonna be a great show. First person we have, I'd like to welcome the editor-in-chief of Legaltech News, ALM, Mr. Zach Warren. Zach.
Hey there, everybody. Ready to talk about how we're turning Terminator into a Hallmark Christmas movie?
Yes, thank you.
Great.
I appreciate that. Our second guest today is our Senior Research Analyst of Legal Risk and Compliance at IDC, Mr. Ryan O'Leary.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Ryan. And finally, we have the man who I call when all else fails and I have absolutely no idea what's going on, which, as Rob knows, is most of the time. Mr. Chris Dahl, the Vice President of Product Development Advisory Services here at Lighthouse. Hello, Chris. How are you today, sir?
Hello, Bill. Glad to be with you.
Thank you. You're with all of us. You can greet everybody.
I'm glad to be with all of you. And I'm sorry I didn't have a witty joiner like Zach did. I tried to think about it in 30 seconds, but
Chris, everything's a competition, so you're going to get a demerit for that. So I mean, Ryan, so far, it's going to be between Ryan and Zach who's winning the podcast, but you're in third. I'm just going to say.
I think that's fair.
Awesome. Well, Look, it's, 2020. What can we say? It's been quite the journey. We've seen a lot of crazy things happen, and even in our e-discovery space. And why don't we kick it off with Zach? Zach, what are some of the top trends that you've seen this year?
Yeah, a little bit of a slow year. I'd say no, not so much. I mean, what everybody's talking about and has been talking about for at least the past 9 months, COVID-19, the pandemic, and particularly for our space, the remote working move. That obviously has had a huge impact for law firms, corporate legal departments, everybody in our space. And it kind of touches on a little bit of everything from productivity to security to information governance, particularly in a discovery space. It's really been interesting from my standpoint, just seeing the acceleration of a lot of trends that we are already seeing. We are already seeing a lot of people moving to the remote model, moving to the cloud, starting to wrap their hands, at least in the beginning stages, around how exactly all of this is going to be looking in the future as more people were starting to work remotely, as more people had mobile devices. But what particularly March and April kicked off is everybody saying, oh man, not only are we starting to look into this, we literally can't send people to collect in offices right now. So the past 9 months has been a crash course, I think, for a lot of people in how exactly do we do remote collection? How exactly are we making sure that all of this review is done from people that are geographically dispersed? How is litigation going to come back in remote courts the same way that it is going to? And it's been interesting to track. And as I know we're going to talk about, something that I think we're going to continue to track here in the coming years.
Yeah, great point. Chris, what about you? What have you seen?
I mean, just riffing off of Zach's points, there was a big momentum shift to collaboration and chat sort of entering the mainstream and displacing email. And, what we saw with the pandemic is many organizations scrambled to implement chat and collaboration and video chat software like what we're using here to continue to do business. So there was sort of the practical element of teams needing to adapt quickly their cultures to work over collaborative and video environments. And then there was also, a big uptick in needing to deal with the data for the purposes of discovery and needing to implement compliant programs around these new collaboration tools that were sort of business critical to get implemented. So, before the pandemic, there was always this issue of IT and the business wanting to implement productivity tools as quickly as possible to, help differentiate and accelerate the business. And that, the pressure got put down even harder on that concept with the pandemic, and legal and compliance teams, have to react and make sure that they are implementing compliant programs around that and can deal with the data once it comes out the other side. So I would say, again, shift in the momentum, accelerating the momentum in 2020, and I see that continuing.
Yeah, and just jumping off that, I think that we expect in the beginning of this pandemic that the drastic economic fallout that was going to come from this was going to slash budgets of legal. But I think we've seen the exact opposite, where there's been a pivot from enterprises in the C-suite to go towards the moving up the importance of business resiliency in the C-suite priorities, and in turn funnel money into legal because they are protecting the organization. So I think we've actually seen the corporate legal centers maintaining budget and getting actually renewed calls to operationalize.
And as someone who is in business development for a legal technology company, may I say bravo to that.
And Ryan, like any other big trends that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, just echoing what Zach said, I think that a lot of folks were caught unawares and thought that they could avoid remote collections when we were already getting more and more dispersed as a workforce. So we've seen that. We've also seen, I think right before the pandemic, there was some major data security incidents in the industry, right, that happened and really made people think about data control and how often we are duplicating data sets and moving them around different tools, and really woken up to the fact that hey, this really sensitive data may be out there outside of our control a number of times. And maybe that's something we should, I don't know, track, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, just maybe. Yeah, it seems
Yeah.
important.
Ryan, let's talk a little bit about the privacy shield and the lack of clarity
sure.
around that. I mean, that was something else. Just just when you thought 2020 couldn't get any more confusing or stressful for certain people. Let's talk a little bit about that. Just specifically, the lack of clarity around it, how prohibitive the corporate rules are, et cetera.
Yeah, sure. So, late this summer, we had that ruling come down, the Schrems 2 ruling, which kind of caught, completely invalidated this mechanism for cross-border transfers of data between the United States and the EU, right? So not only were we in this remote world where we were trying to figure out how to do data collections and manage our data sphere remotely, but then we were told, well, not only do you have to do it remotely, but you have to do it remotely in country. You can't take that EU data and move it to the US and have the US team manage it. And so now you had to come up with another workaround. And two of the other workarounds for this, the standard contextual. So there was really three ways, right, that you could move data under GDPR from the EU to the US. And that was the privacy shield, standard contractual clauses, and binding corporate rules. And binding corporate rules is probably the safest way, but those take years to implement. You have to work very closely with the European regulators to get those implemented and approved. So you can't do that overnight, like when a ruling comes down. And then the standard contractual clauses, I think just last week, we finally got some guidance from the European Union on what those actually look like and should need to look like. So it was for the better part of 4 months here, it was very confusing and very risky to move data from the EU to the US.
Yeah. Zach, what I want to talk to you about here is, and we've discussed this in prep for this, is the collaboration between IT and legal. Everything we've just talked about, whether it's the increase in budget for the legal and IT departments to make sure that the company can still do business remotely, but the idea is that legal and technology didn't always sit at the same lunch table as it was. Now they're not. Now you can't walk down the hall anymore. So what's the impact of the pandemic and how we've seen an increase in cloud migrations and these two departments having to work together now more than ever?
It's definitely been interesting, and kind of to your point, it's kind of paradoxical where when they were right down the hall, you didn't really think about them much, but then as soon as you can't talk to them face to face, you realize, oh wait, these people are a lot more essential than I originally thought. So especially in March and April, I mean, everybody just kind of had their hands up in the air. What are we going to do here? And a lot of what we saw is not only a lot of gratitude for IT helping people get on board, but a lot more collaboration just out of necessity, helping roll things up, just simple things, even like how are VPNs going to work under this new paradigm, making sure that everybody actually has laptops and is able to connect remotely. The very simple low-hanging fruit that maybe some people had connection issues before, and yeah, we'll take care of that eventually. Now it is business critical. What we've kind of seen over the past 9 months is kind of slow sliding back into normalcy a little bit. One of our reporters, Victoria Hutchins, had a piece within the past week or two that essentially said, in the beginning, IT was heralded, but now they're getting a lot of the same calls that they got pre-pandemic, where why isn't my email connecting fast enough on this remote server, et cetera. And especially for Discovery, you're starting to see a lot of the same work that was happening pre-pandemic happen once again, maybe in a different fashion. Maybe it's remote collection versus on-premise, but it's the same type of work that's starting to spin back up much more frequently. And kind of to Ryan's point earlier, a lot of the funding that we thought may be getting pooled, it's still there. So people are saying we're going to have to work the same way that we had before. Maybe the operations are different, but IT and legal are having to collaborate just as much, if not more, now than they were pre-pandemic.
Well, and another thing, and I'll direct this to Chris, like what happens in a company when all of a sudden you have literally every employee now collaborating remotely and using, tools that maybe they weren't totally familiar with? What are some of the challenges and, I guess, benefits that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess beginning with the benefits, from a very practical perspective, in some ways, collaboration has been, in some cases, easier, and in some ways, easier to move projects forward. Whereas before, it would take time to ship people to the same location. And when you did, you had some people on the phone and some people in the room. And with collaboration, you can equalize that playing field and kind of put everyone in the same experience, which helps increase collaboration and get participation across groups, which is really important when you're trying to drive collaboration between like legal and IT organizations that might be in two different locations. So I would say that's a benefit from a challenges perspective. There are many, and I won't go on and on, but two popped into my head. The first, in listening to Ryan, when you're from a privacy perspective with the changes in privacy regulations across the world, you can put the best programs in place to respect those and update them, but then there's sort of the software and physical controls within these chat and collaboration tools that need to be set up to mirror those policies. Because if you're not careful, you can end up with a collaboration system that's just a giant pool of data that anyone who's part of it can access, and permissions can help you get far enough, but there are also even more logical boundaries like compliance boundaries that you can set up in these modern tools that help complement those privacy regulations. So that kind of cuts both ways as a challenge and a benefit. And then the other challenge is just, kind of like I said earlier with data types, we're just so used to an industry dealing with sort of the four corners of an email and an attachment. And all of a sudden, when you've got collaboration data where you're chatting back and forth and you're referencing a wiki and you're referencing attachments to a collaboration channel, and those attachments are constantly getting updated by multiple contributors, that's a whole different story that needs to get stitched together in the world of discovery. So that's a challenge in the specific trade of what we do.
Yeah. So let's keep. Oh, sorry. Please go.
No, yeah, no, and not to mention, just jumping off of Chris's point, you have folks coming in and leaving those channels ad nauseum, or creating. If you don't have good, controls around who can create which channel, you're going to end up with like a million channels of puppy pictures and then like 20 for the same project. So you got to make sure you're having those controls. And I can't echo what Chris said enough. Wholeheartedly, it's going to be the biggest problem in 2021, I think. Not to jump ahead to the predictions portion, but.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I wanted to transition to now. It's a good jumping off point, Chris. With all of these changes and all the challenges and trends in mind, how do we start to prepare for 2020? I mean, other than the fact that I'm going to trade in my 3-piece suit for a hazmat suit just so I can meet with clients again, because it's starting to get real. I mean, just meeting remotely is become an issue. And I never thought I'd say this, but I'm excited to see people again. I'm more of a dog person. But what do we do to prepare for 2021 with all these challenges?
You can still wear 3-piece suits when you're on video like this. I'm
sorry, I can't do that. I tried to do one virtually. It didn't take.
Yeah, I was going to say a flannel in a microwave is a close second, though, to a 3-piece suit. So,
plus you save a lot of money because you just have to buy the top half of it now.
That's it. I mean, actually, this cuts off right here.
Yeah. So I think looking forward to 2021, all of us need to get very serious about how we're attacking the problem of this sort of meandering collaboration data sources, and how we look at that in the context of traditionally managed documents during compliance and discovery. So that's one thing. But to introduce a new concept, the other thing I would say is these platforms are constantly changing, whether it's Microsoft 365 or G Suite, or even SaaS tools that are specific to our industry, like Relativity One or CS Disco. All of those types of cloud managed platforms are constantly being updated with new functionality. Whereas in sort of an on-premise or a server-based world, you can very much control the upgrade schedule, and you can control and make your ediscovery program static. Well, now in this cloud-based world and collaboration-based world and SaaS-based world, you have to develop a program that is dynamic and that can stay on top of those updates and keeping that program updated and modern and continuously changing as part of the status quo. And there's sort of the paradigm has sort of been flipped on its head, whereas before defensibility meant a static program, and now I believe defensibility is going to be a dynamic program where you're aware of the most recent updates. So in addition to just dealing with data sources, I see adapting to cloud updates is a big part of what we need to do in 2021.
And Ryan, what are some of the things that are on your preparation list for 2021?
Oh, well, besides hopefully getting a vaccine, there's a lot of stuff that we're looking at. I think from perspective, IDC covers it from both a end user and an industry perspective, the space. So, I think that we're moving towards jumping off of that data privacy part, and we're looking at, the cloud and that shared responsibility model where the end user really has control of their data and they don't have to worry about the security and all that stuff. I think that we need to figure out how to meld those two, the service provider and the cloud, in a better way, because there's a lot of incentive, right? Financial incentive for service providers to stay on premises, and not necessarily speaking about Lighthouse, but the entire sphere, right? There's a lot of incentive to be able to bill for those hosting charges, where the security issues and the data control and all that other stuff that folks are going to start to really be concerned about, especially in terms of where is that data actually residing. We're going to see a lot more interest from the end user and the corporation on where that data is actually residing, how many copies of it, getting more fidelity into it instead of just blindly sending it out like they used to. I think we're starting to see an inflection point, and in 2021, we might actually see the enterprise be a lot more educated about e-discovery than they were in the past. So that's one of the things we're looking at. And then the other thing that we mentioned about these collaboration tools is we need better ways to collect that data, as well as what we're doing right now, the video and audio, where a lot of these internal meetings and a lot of the stuff that a lot of the hot docs, as we sometimes call them, or noteworthy documents, will now be audio files and not necessarily emails. And that stuff's going to need to be processed and collected and reviewed. So I think we will see a lot of investment in that in 2021 in ways to better transcribe and parse through that stuff. Because let me tell you, as somebody who's listened to weeks and weeks of FBI wire recordings as part of an e-discovery review, you do not want to do that. You want to be able to search it.
I want a summary of that case that you just talked about, because that sounds super interesting. Zach,
ironically, Ryan recognizes Bill's voice from.
I was just going to say, that's why I want to know. I just want to make sure that it wasn't about me.
No,
Zach,
that was the other one.
Zach, on the when we do the podcast, we like to leave listeners with some tips and some takeaways. We discussed a lot here. Can you give us sort of a 10,000 foot overview of some of the key takeaways as you see them, and let's recap it a little bit for the listeners so they have some best practices going forward.
Most definitely. I think number one, kind of riffing off both what Ryan and Chris said, the old problems aren't going away just because of the COVID pandemic. Going into 2020, I would have said the biggest thing for this year is going to be the CCPA. It's going to be privacy laws. That hasn't changed. And in fact, in November, California passed the CPRA, which even puts some even more stringent guidelines around what you can do with personal data. That's only going to continue, most likely. And kind of to Ryan's point that he just said, a better educated enterprise is going to want to know what exactly is happening with that data, frankly, because of the penalties that can come out of what happens if you misuse it. California probably isn't going to be the only one, especially if something like the CPRA is successful. That's something that you should have your hands around. Second of all, I mean, and kind of to Chris's point about constant updates, this is an industry that is going to continue to constantly change. The rapid pace of change is only going to be increasing, especially as people try and adjust to this new remote working model. So that's something, if you think 2020 was crazy, I wouldn't necessarily bank on 2021 being less crazy.
How dare you? You're going to kill people in our audience are jumping off buildings. What are you doing to us?
I bring the 2020 holiday cheer by telling you that nothing is going to be slowing down quite soon. It's honest though. You really need to mentally be prepared for what's coming next. And I think a lot of this really is a mindset change as much as anything else, where people need to be aware of just all of the constant change that is happening. I feel like probably a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are the ones who are aware of that, but the change management of this all and making sure that everybody else within the legal department, within the law firm, is as prepared as you are is going to be a major challenge moving forward.
Hey, one question I'll throw out to everyone. There's been some positive developments in, a vaccine, or at least a couple of vaccines getting approved. I wonder what you think about when it becomes realistic for people to return back to the office, due to, vaccines and such. Do you think, are people really going to go back to the office? What are you hearing out there as far as companies' plans to actually bring back in a workforce, or are we all going to stay working remotely?
I personally am dying to get back to an office. As you could probably see, I'm upstairs in my daughter's room in the most quiet place in the house right now. We don't have a good place to really work in this house. So I personally am dying to get back to the office. I think that most people will move to what IDC had before. And shout out to my corporate overlords for the flexibility that I had before the pandemic. But the ability to work in the office or at home and not be so tied to clocking in at 9 o'clock and clocking out at 5 o'clock, the old 1950s assembly time card type of way, right? It's going to be more of a dynamic, and maybe even we might even see some overhead savings with a hoteling where you don't necessarily have, I know companies like Accenture already do this where you book a desk for the day when you want to go into the office. You don't have a dedicated space. So they can have a smaller office, but you still have a central place to meet clients and whatnot.
I definitely think that's going to be the case. And just kind of talking to the acceleration point again, that was something you're already starting to see a little bit, especially with law libraries condensing and law firms wanting to cut down on their real estate. I think there will be a little bit of a pushback, though. I know there was a major Magic Circle firm in the UK, I forget which one, but was saying, okay, we're just going to have exactly what Ryan just said, a flexible working model. Nobody has their own desk. Just when you come in, make sure you grab something. It's all okay. And a lot of the partners said, hold up a second. I like my corner office. My corner office is great. You can't take that away from me. So I think there's going to be a little bit of a give and take there. And particularly for ediscovery, it could mean a lot up in the air, let's say, where people are going to be working, what firms are going to have open offices, where data is actually going to be residing, just because I think that argument isn't settled.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Bill. I'm sorry. Or I'm sorry, Rob.
No, go for it, Chris.
No, I was just going to say, I think another interesting dimension is like an employee or a talent base. Before the pandemic, Lighthouse, we had already kind of opened up our recruiting nationally and globally because, you can't find all of the talent in the world consolidated in a specific market, and you can't convince all the talent in the world to relocate to a specific market. And so, I think, people have learned how to work remotely in a shotgun fashion, both on the company side as well as on the employee side. So I think part of sort of post-pandemic is figuring out that balance between getting the magic of having people in person, but also having the flexibility to acquire the best talent. So I think companies that are going to win are going to have that flexibility to acquire talent as the priority versus having people in the same physical location. Of course, there's variations by business, but that's kind of how I think about it.
So no one here is going to trade in their job to become a commercial real estate agent, but there's going to be some sort of a hybrid. We see this as leading to some sort of a hybrid model in terms of coming into the office, holding onto your corner office, but not necessarily mandating that everybody come in.
Isn't hybrid always the answer to everything?
Exactly.
That and the definition of reasonableness, right, are the two answers to everything that I ever learned in law school. Rob, I think we got some questions from the audience.
Yeah, and just want to encourage people that are listening. We are going to shift to Q&A portion. If you have any questions, please go ahead and enter them through the chat function. And let me go ahead and start with our first question. So I'll sort of throw this out to everyone, but do you think the pandemic will have lasting effects on the e-discovery space and has, other than what we just talked about, working from home, are there other things that have permanently changed as far as how we do things?
kind of getting to Ryan's point a little bit earlier, I think there will be a general awareness, frankly, of what e-discovery is among the wider legal department, among partners in law firms. Previously, okay, do discovery, whatever you have to do to collect it, cool. I think especially a lot more GCs, AGCs are starting to realize not only the risks that come with privacy and with data being in dispersed places, but also kind of the costs associated with it as well, as people are looking at budgets, what exactly 2021 is going to look like. They're starting to realize e-discovery, obviously it's not something that's not going, or that's going away. But it's also something that is going to only continue to increase in importance moving forward. So that obviously is good as people realize what the capabilities are, what you can do with e-discovery tools. It also may mean a little bit more oversight on current projects and what exactly is happening within a certain litigation. So take that as you will.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's specific to e-discovery so much as just this general acceleration. You know, you see all those cartoons out there about, oh, what started digital transformation at your corporation? Was it, mandate or COVID-19, right? So I think it's more an overall organizational wide shift toward an acceleration of everything that they were already working on. But I think that the one thing that we're going to see is the one impact that COVID-19 is going to have on the discovery profession is the workload, right? Because, litigation lags a couple of years behind. How many bankruptcies, how many contract breaches, how many other, mass torts have happened because of this COVID-19 virus and the shutdowns and everything that's going on, right? The litigation load is that the dam is going to break soon, and it's going to be a good time to be in discovery, quite frankly.
Yeah, the only things we didn't touch on that popped into my head in response to that question is, one, there should be an increased emphasis on security, right? I mean, as workforces are getting distributed and, all the other cliches that apply, like data volumes exploding. I mean, there should just be more and more emphasis on security. And then the other thing we didn't talk about is, one of the trends pre-2020 was an emphasis on sort of accomplishing document review tasks with technology and analytics and AI, and I think accelerating some of those trends will reduce the number of people you need to get into closed quarters to do document review and address that problem more efficiency, and really lever the document reviewers with technology so that they can have a much bigger impact than just kind of sifting through the documents one by one. So those are two things I expect to fall from this.
Cool. Another question from the audience. I'll put this out. Zach, why don't we start with you? Besides email, what type of data is the most important to preserve?
You started with the one who doesn't actually have the JD here. You're killing me.
Listen, by the way, I have a JD, and you don't want to ask me anything. That's why I ask the questions.
Relevant data, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Bill's JD has an asterisk next to it. I don't know why, but.
No, I think it does kind of get back to what I believe Chris was talking about earlier about collaboration platforms. I mean, especially with everybody working remotely now, I know that I've used 10 times more Slack than I did in 2019. I know that our GChat has been exploding over the past year. I mean, I work remotely as it is, and I have for a while, but I've had a lot of my colleagues come to me and say, oh, can you help me set up whatever Zoom chat like we're on right now, or like a lot Gmail or Google Hangout, etc. So those collaboration platforms, I don't know you're necessarily calling it the most important, and I'll leave it to some of the e-discovery experts to make that determination, but it's definitely one you should be paying a lot more attention to than perhaps you have in the past.
Yeah, I would say the most important thing to collect other than email is whatever you're using to discuss your business. So it's just going to depend. If could be Slack, it could be Teams, but there are a lot of organizations that have this notion of allowing their employees to download whatever application they feel makes their teams productive, and so then there's this whole overlay of shadow IT, where IT has allowed organizations to download this application but isn't actually controlling it. And so the answer to that question is, unfortunately, it depends. But what you need to do is understand what you're using to have those business communications, and then also deploy an element of reasonableness, where you're not over collecting duplicatives, or over preserving, I guess was the question, duplicative sources, if you feel like you're capturing all of the business communications with email and Teams, for example.
And I would also, you might want to pay particular attention to video chat platforms, just because, some of that stuff that you may have thought was, internal and being discussed is now being recorded, in a multitude of places. And everything you say it's not just a phone call anymore, right? You're actually on video talking to folks. And if you're doing internal meetings and recording them, you need to be very aware of what's in there and what, less is more, I guess I should say, in terms of video recordings.
Yeah, I just saw a question come in from actually one of our favorite podcast guests, and the question is do you see a focus shifting from remote review and remote supervision of these reviews? Do you see more emphasis on that, or do you start to see a shift towards more intelligent culling and analysis of data from like real early stages of a case? Any tips? Maybe start with Chris on that one.
Yeah, I think that kind of goes to my comment a moment ago, where I think technology-enabled review was a trend we were already seeing pre-pandemic, and between the proliferation of all these data sources and sort of the emphasis on people needing to be remote, I see it as I see that trend as accelerating post-pandemic as well. So, I also don't know that it's an either or kind of a proposition. I think it's more of a sequencing and more of a levering proposition, where you want to get your document reviewers to use those technologies that can help them cull, analyze, and get to the most important data the quickest. So for me, it's about melding those two concepts together, as opposed to having it be like a trade-off. So I don't know, that's how I see things going.
Yeah, and very generally, anytime that somebody comes to me with a AI or automation tool over the past couple of years, my first question is, okay, practical. What does it do practically? And I think a lot of not only technology providers, but on the end user perspective, they've been able to handle that question a little bit better, because they're starting to actually apply these advanced analytics, these AI technologies, in a way that has a discrete outcome and is not just technology for technology's sake. Increasingly, I do find that moving to the left of the EDRM into the information governance zone a little bit more. And I think that is a good thing for culling a little bit of that data early on. But increasingly, I think it's going to be a little column A, a little column B, where there is going to be more remote review, but in a way that is done more smartly and with that discrete business outcome in mind.
Would you call it a hybrid model, Zach?
I would, as a matter of fact, call it a hybrid model, which is the answer to everything.
Just quickly. In terms of technology assisted review, I think there's a tendency to look at it as a replacement and not necessarily an enhancement. I think we need to start looking at technology assisted review as a digital coworker, essentially, right? Where they're basically I think the best thing you can do with it is to organize and seed the documents for the reviewers in a way that bubbles potentially relevant documents up to the top to keep their mind sharp, so they're not slogging through finding that needle in the middle of 20,000 spam emails, right? That they're just clicking not relevant on over and over again. And then I think that you should always be trying to call in and limit the corpus of data that you're bringing into any review tool, anyways. So like Zach said, it is a hybrid model, but I think the best thing that you can be doing with technology assisted review and AI is using it to enhance the reviewer's ability to find that relevant information and make sure that the most relevant information is being reviewed first.
So we have another question. It's it's a bit on the more, some would say morbid side, some would say practical, realistic side. While budgets have increased in the legal department, and we talked about that, the truth is a lot of these companies their stock has taken a tumble, and we are going to see some downsizing. So with RIFs potentially coming in early 2020, how do we prepare for those, especially imaging laptops where you can't necessarily, the most effective way to do that isn't necessarily remotely. So do we have any, Chris, you want to touch on that at all, or how we see companies addressing dealing with laptops from employees that may get riffed in Q1?
Yeah, I mean, there's multi parts to that question. So I guess most practically, just like what we were talking about earlier, companies need to have a process in place to identify those laptops and analyze them to determine, whether employees were violating any of their restrictive covenants prior to leaving the business, as well as make sure that they're preserved according to their legal retention policies and eventually wiped so they could be returned as an asset to the organization. So there's sort of that element of it, but there's kind of the more difficult elements of doing some of this work remotely, since you have people distributed around the globe and BYOD policies, as well as the fact that it's not all about laptops anymore, right? I mean, a lot of people keep their information about work in OneDrive or SharePoint or wherever else. And so again, it kind of goes back to the comment earlier. It sort of depends again, because you have to identify where all of that data exists and have processes to capture it and analyze it, at or around the time of an employee's departure. And that's true not of RIFs, but just in general as you're managing employees coming and going. So it's a combination of doing some of that work remotely and using different tools to analyze the assets based on where they're stored and created. But a good program should accommodate all of those things. There was also a question about whether there'll be an uptick in remote collections in general. And I think the answer to that question, I mean, it's related, is yes. There are better tools now to do remote collections. There's a lot of data living in data sources that are in the cloud, and so there's nothing special about being in person to do that. People are generally more accepting to doing their work remotely than they were before. So for all of those reasons, I think there'll be a uptick in that work as well. And then again, the thing that'll turn on is sort of the trust of the custodian in the first place, where, if there's an issue of trust with the custodian, you'll have to go back to, doing something more in person, but in sort of run of the mill work. I think there'll definitely be a big shift to remote collections and management of data.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone. This has been a great discussion today, and at least for me, a great way to spend eDiscovery Day. Want to really thank you guys, Zach, Ryan, Chris, mostly Bill. It's been great to have you on the show, and Bill, of course, always to have you as a co-host.
I would only add that you guys, Chris has been on the show before. Rob knows this well. Zach and Ryan, prepare for a level of fame somewhere between a Backstreet Boy and a Beatle. You're going to get chased down the street now that you've been on this podcast. I'm just throwing it out there because I don't want you guys to say you didn't warn me, especially when we send you.
I can hear the crowds assembling right now.
When we send you a Law Candor t-shirt, forget it. That's now you can't even wear a disguise anymore because there's only go out to guests.
Yeah, I mean, COVID has really helped keep us grounded. It's just a good thing we're not out in public all the time. No, you guys are awesome. Thanks again for joining, and thanks everyone for listening. We really appreciate it. Have a great day.
Thank you.